This is Duke University. I met in the waiting room. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a t-shirt with holes in it that had a little cartoon of Snoopy on it, and it said, "Chicks dig me." And he was an older guy, a little overweight, and he was kind, and he was sitting across from me, and he started up a conversation. And he asked me if I was there for treatment, and I said yes, I was. And then he looked at me and he told me I was young. And I was. I was 20. I was in the waiting room of the Hillman Cancer Center in Pittsburgh, where I'm from, and I was awaiting blood work results. This was in February. That previous October, so 2 years ago this month, I was driving to the Pittsburgh airport because I had gone home for fall break, and I was on my way back here. And I received a phone call with the results of an MRI that I had had that morning for the lingering pain in my hip. And it wasn't a stress fracture, and it wasn't a pulled muscle that I expected. It was a tumor that was wrapped all the way around my left hip, and that I later found out matched the tumors in my stomach and my pancreas and my chest. And it is what they say it is. It was surreal. Could not believe it. I mean, why would I have cancer? I was 20. I exercised all the time. I ate at Whole Foods all the time. I had never been allergic to anything. I'd never broken a bone. And all of a sudden, I was very deeply unhealthy. The diagnosis that came with the phone call was Ewing sarcoma, which is a kind of bone cancer that, if metastatic in someone of my age, had a long-term survival rate of 10 to 15%. So the first thing I did when I went to the hospital was had a CT scan to see if it was in my lungs, to see if it was metastatic, if that was my long-term survival rate. And after the test, I went home, and I sat in a hideous armchair that my parents have in the living room. And I was waiting, and I didn't do anything. Like, I just sat there. I didn't go outside and breathe in the fresh air. I didn't read the classics. I didn't go skydiving. I just sat in this ugly-ass chair and waited for some very well-informed predictions of when I would die. And the call came, and it wasn't in my lungs, and it also wasn't even sarcoma. It was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that had presented in an unusual way at an unusual age, which is a much better diagnosis. But even so, I had to come back to Duke, pick up my things, and then come home to Pittsburgh for treatment. And my parents and my brother were very supportive throughout. I remember when I was picking up my things here, my brother came down from Michigan. He had strep throat. He took like a 4 a.m. flight just to help me move some suitcases. And I was sitting in my apartment packing with my brother and some friends, and one of my friends looked at me and she asked me, she was like, "What was it like when you found out?" And I said, "When I found out I had cancer, it was surreal, and it was hard." Then she looked at my brother and she said, "What was it like when you found out?" And he said, "When I found out I had strep throat, it was surreal and it was hard." So we took all my things, we brought him back home. And the first thing I did at the hospital was they gave me a big white binder full of all the information and paperwork and scheduling that I would need. And I love binders. I love checklists. I love going through and seeing what I need to do. So to me, the paperwork was comforting, and I filled it all out, except for the last piece of paper. It was a light blue sheet at the end, and it was a living will. And I remember specifically looking at it and thinking, fuck that. So I didn't do it. But I did everything else, and that started with oocyte cryopreservation, which is essentially, in the case that chemotherapy damaged my eggs' fertility, I would be on pregnancy hormones for a few weeks, and then they would harvest a couple of them to keep them in a freezer in the basement of the hospital for whenever I wanted to have children. So I went to the endocrinology and fertility office. I went to the front desk and asked for the forms, and they gave them to me. And it said, "Your name." Then right below that, it said, "Sperm donor's name." And then I said, "These are not the correct forms." So then they did give me the right forms. And I started the process, which was those pregnancy hormones and also steroids that I was on because that helped with the inflammation from the tumors. So at this point, I am literally on pregnancy hormones on steroids. I craved Chipotle like nothing. Chipotle opens at 11. I woke up at like 8 and didn't do anything but wait. I got there at 10:15, 10:20, and then waited outside. So that lasted for a couple weeks, and then I was off the hormones and everything went well, and my cravings diminished somewhat. But now that some of my eggs were safe, meant that I could start treatment in earnest, that means the more toxic chemo drugs, right? The ones that blanket target any reproducing cell that make you lose your hair and lose weight and feel nauseated. And I knew that. I knew that cancer is being bald and being around needles and blood and being around sick people. But there were things I didn't know. I didn't know that cancer is flushing the toilet twice every time I go to the bathroom because chemo pee might make my family sick. I didn't know that cancer is seeing my father, who is the most intelligent and articulate person I know, be at a loss for words. I didn't know that cancer is struggling to find an eyebrow pencil that doesn't make me look like a dead Kardashian. I didn't know that cancer is watching my mother saran wrap the catheter in my arm every night, making conversation, pretending as if these are not the worst months of her life. My last day of chemo was on my 21st birthday. So I too threw up when I turned 21. And my birthday's in March, which means that my experience with cancer treatment, start to finish, was 6 months. And I had access to excellent medical coverage, a world-class hospital, undying support from family and friends, and biochemical luck. In short, I had it easier than a lot of people do. I had it easier than who that day that I met him in the waiting room told me that his wife had just passed away, that he had multiple myeloma, which is a worse diagnosis than mine, and that he was actually moving to Raleigh to be treated at Duke Hospital. And I got excited at the last part. I asked him for his phone number. I said I would call him, and when I was back at school, I would visit him, and that I would support him. And I never really called him. I think I called twice, left a voicemail once. The other time, someone else picked up, and the conversation sort of died out. And I didn't forget either, by the way. I thought about it. I thought about him, and then I just didn't do it. And I don't have an answer for myself or for you or for him. I am afraid that I'm betraying my experience with cancer, that I am neglecting whatever it is that I owe to other patients and families and hospitals. I don't run any of the races. I don't buy yogurt with pink lids. Those are things that everybody would be able to do, though. Not everybody would be able to call somebody who's currently in treatment and give them the support of survivorship the way that I could have and the way that I didn't. The objective when you have cancer is to get as far away from it as possible. And I think I overshot it. That's not to say that I'm unchanged. I grew a lot less patient. I stopped sitting or wasting time on things that didn't really engage me. I quit Model UN, for example, because it's make-believe, okay? I started to take a few more risks to spend time on what I wanted to spend time on. I moved to New York for the summer. I tried stand-up a couple of times. I involved myself with the people and projects that made me feel smart and alive and funny. And part of that is that I had this incredible privilege in the medical care and the support and love that I received, and I'm trying to live my life in a way that values that. I'm trying to earn the luck that gave me my life back. And I hate that I didn't really call. And I am still struggling with my relationship to current patients. But I am living more intentionally. And for now, that's just going to have to be enough.
Sofia Manfredi.